It was a bitterly cold evening in late November when Clara moved into the Lydell Manor. The sprawling, dilapidated estate sat on the edge of town, surrounded by thick forests that seemed to swallow the path leading to it. Clara, an aspiring writer looking for solitude and inspiration, had heard of the manor's history only in passing. Whispers about its eccentric previous owners, strange occurrences, and the tragic tales that followed anyone who had dared live there. Her new home was a towering structure, its stone walls heavy with age. The moment Clara stepped inside, a musty smell of dust and mildew filled the air. Yet there was something oddly mesmerizing about the place, an allure that seemed to call to her. As she unpacked, she stumbled upon an antique mirror hidden behind a curtain in a forgotten corner of the manor. Its frame was ornate, carved with intricate designs of birds and vines. The mirror itself, however, was far from ordinary. Its glass was cracked in several places, distorting the reflections in a way that made Clara's skin crawl. There was a chill in the air around it, as if the mirror were drawing all the warmth from the room. Despite its unsettling presence, Clara couldn't help but be drawn to it. She set the mirror upright against the wall, deciding she'd explore its mystery later. The shadows in the manor seemed to grow darker with nightfall, and Clara, eager for something to break the silence, grabbed her journal and sat near the mirror. Hours passed as she scribbled away, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was a familiar sensation, one that tingled at the back of her neck, but tonight it was different, more pronounced. Her eyes kept darting back to the mirror, where her reflection appeared strange, almost distorted, as if someone else were looking back at her. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was just the flickering candlelight playing tricks on her. But then something shifted in the reflection. It was subtle at first, a slight movement, as if her reflection had blinked before her own eyes did. Clara froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked at herself in the mirror, but she didn't blink. The figure in the glass, however, did. Suddenly the room grew colder, the air heavier. Clara's breath came in visible clouds as she stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached out to touch the mirror, and the moment her fingers brushed the surface, the reflection seemed to ripple like water. The figure inside the mirror, which had been so eerily still moments before, now raised its hand and mimicked her actions. Except it wasn't mimicking. The reflection's hand moved independently of Clara's. The figure in the mirror smiled, a grin that didn't match the terror in Clara's eyes. In a panic, Clara yanked her hand away from the glass. She stumbled backward, her pulse racing. "This isn't real," she whispered to herself, but the reflection didn't stop smiling. The figure leaned closer to the glass, its eyes gleaming with something dark, something hungry. Clara turned away, desperate to leave the room, but as she did, she felt a cold grip on her wrist. She spun around, expecting to see nothing. But there, in the mirror, a shadowy hand was reaching out from the glass. Clara gasped, pulling her arm back, but it was too late. The hand tightened, pulling her towards the mirror. She screamed, struggling to break free, but the more she fought, the more she felt herself being drawn toward the glass. Her body was no longer her own. She was losing control, her limbs moving against her will. And then, just as suddenly, the grip vanished. Clara staggered backward, her back hitting the wall. She looked at the mirror, her reflection staring back at her with wide, terrified eyes. But something was wrong. The reflection wasn't hers. The woman in the glass was familiar, but not in the way Clara had expected. She had the same face, the same features, yet she looked older, more worn. The woman in the reflection was not Clara, but someone else entirely. Someone she had seen before in a dream. The figure in the mirror began to speak, its voice low and distorted. "You thought you could escape, didn't you?" Clara's throat went dry. "Who are you?" The figure's lips curled into a wicked grin. "You are me, and I am you." Suddenly, it all clicked. The stories, the strange whispers about the manor, about the mirror. It wasn't just an antique, it was a prison. A mirror that trapped the souls of those who dared to look too long into it. Those who were drawn to its cold embrace weren't merely looking at their reflection. They were seeing someone else, someone who had already been consumed by the mirror. Clara stumbled back, her mind racing. The stories hadn't been warnings, they were clues, each one pointing to the inevitable truth. The mirror was not simply a reflection, it was a doorway, and once you crossed its threshold, you became part of it. Her reflection was no longer hers, but something that had once been. She had become the next prisoner of Lydell Manor, her soul now tangled within the mirror, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to take her place. Clara turned to flee, but the mirror's surface rippled again, pulling her toward it as if it were alive. The last thing she saw before the darkness closed in was her reflection, grinning wickedly, knowing that she would never leave. And so the cycle continued.